being outside favors better decision making, and it's a very critical point. I wrote a book about this about 6 years ago called 10 Good Reasons to Go for a Walk. There is now an abundant literature in medicine, in psychology, neuroscience, showing that when you're outside, particularly when you're immersed in nature, you tend to make better decisions, investment decisions, professional decisions, personal decisions, because we need it. That's how we are made as human being. Evolutionary biologists explain to us that unless you move, unless you're in nature, it's very hard to make pertinent decisions. And I've taken a great interest in that. And I interview on a regular basis for the monthly barometer prominent CEOs. And you can see the pattern. Prominent CEOs, people who have a strong reputation in terms of their own skills and decision-making capabilities, do this.
Hello and welcome to Say Hi to the Future, a podcast aimed at highlighting the human side of human ingenuity, clever, inventive, and original thinking. My name is Ken Tencer, curator of Say Hi to the Future and CEO of Spyder Works, a leading business consultancy for mid-market organizations and intrapreneurs globally. With me today is Thierry Malleret, the founder and managing partner of the Monthly Barometer, an analytical and predictive monthly newsletter. Thierry possesses decades of unique professional experience spanning investment banking as a chief economist and strategist of a major Russian investment bank and as an economist at the EBRD in London, think tanks and academia in New York and Oxford, and government, including a 3-year stint in the Prime Minister's office in Paris. At the World Economic Forum in Switzerland, Thierry founded and headed the Global Risk Network and led the program team for the annual meeting at Davos. In 2015, Thierry also founded the Summit of Minds, a series of high-level meetings that combine hard thinking on major macro issues and the importance of personal well-being and the power of nature. Thierry thus achieved a serendipitous coming together of a lifelong enthusiasm for the great outdoors and the creation of world-class gatherings. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the show. Well, Thierry, welcome to the show this morning.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you so much for having me.
You know, it's funny, we met, I think, for the first time. It was outside of Quebec City in Canada. It was at something called the Summit of the Minds, or the Summit of the Minds, the series that you run. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Sure. So the Monthly Barometer, it's a content platform that is my core business. It's a predictive newsletter that I send to several thousand families, private investors, senior executives, business leaders, media leaders, thinkers around the world. And we assemble part of this community on a regular basis throughout the world. So we have in a month from now, we have the Chamonix Summit of Minds, Chamonix being the home base of the Monthly Barometer. It will be followed by Canada Summit of Minds, the one to which you kindly came a few years ago, 2 years ago. Then we'll have an Armenian Summit of Minds, a US Summit of Minds in Colorado, etc. So we're organizing these summits in a very different manner nowadays because my conviction is that in the post-pandemic world, not knowing first when the pandemic is going to end, but when it's over, 2022, 2023, God knows when, the world will be very different and we'll travel less, mainly because of concerns linked to the environment. And therefore, we'll bring the Summit of Minds to our community in the countries where they are. So we'll have an Asian Summit of Minds, we'll have a Latin American Summit of Minds, Africa, Middle East, etc. And this Summit of Minds is a place where we convene our community. And what makes it very special is the diversity of people who attend. So we combine many families, 50%, majority of our participants are important, prominent families, but we also convene global CEOs, thinkers, media leaders, activists, leaders from civil society, etc.
I'll say one of the things that struck me and that I really enjoyed about the summit, and it prompted me to become a member of your monthly Barometer 100, the fact that everybody participates, that everybody has a role that attends, whether you're speaking or on a panel. It's not a conference where you come and you're static.
Absolutely, you are so right to say that, and I think it's a fundamental ingredient for success. We like to say that every participant at any number of minds is a speaker, and it is true. Whether you are head of state, whether you are prime minister, whether you are the CEO of a very global company, or a young activist of 20 years of age, everybody is on par and everybody is speaking, and it's critically important because we may come back to this issue a bit later, but it's critically important because we don't pay enough attention to weak signals. And if you keep meeting your peers, CEOs meeting CEOs, head of state meeting head of state, academics meeting academics, etc., well, you miss the big picture. You don't understand what's going on. So it's very important. It's critically important to be exposed to different sources of opinion. So
I really enjoy that point of view, and we've done it for so many years in Spyder Works. Maybe not at the same global level, but when we're working with our clients, we're bringing together all the different levels. We bring together, suppliers, distributors, influencers, and it just sets a much different tone, as you're saying. If you're talking to yourself, if you're talking to a mirror, well, you're going to like what you hear.
Absolutely.
You'll agree with yourself.
No doubt. No doubt.
The other thing that I really enjoyed was it's quite a bit of it is outside. Like you brought your own passion for the outdoors and personal well-being into the business and political front.
Well, it's my passion, but I love the outdoors and I love the mountains. But we do it also for a reason. Being outside favors better decision making, and it's a very critical point. I wrote a book about this about 6 years ago called 10 Good Reasons to Go for a Walk. There is now an abundant literature in medicine, in psychology, in neuroscience, showing that when you're outside, particularly when you're immersed in nature, you tend to make better decisions, investment decisions, professional decisions, personal decisions, because we need it. That's how we are made as human being. Evolutionary biologists explain to us that unless you move, unless you're in nature, it's very hard to make pertinent decisions. And I've taken a great interest in that. And I interview on a regular basis for the monthly barometer prominent CEOs. And you can see the pattern. Prominent CEOs, people who have a strong reputation in terms of their own skills and decision-making capabilities, do this. The last one whom I interviewed was Scott Kirby, who is the CEO of United Airlines. And Scott works as much as he can. And he reads a lot. So it goes with other things, of course, but being outside is not only something which is nice and pleasant to do, but it's also, I think, a very critical component of your decision-making capabilities.
Well, as a proud Canadian, I can tell you that I spend many,
of course, I can imagine,
days, evenings, weekends, taking long walks, and I truly buy into what you're saying. For me, for many, it's the ocean. For me, again, being Canadian, it's being lakeside, sitting on a rock, walking by lakes, and it just does so much to clear the mind. Absolutely. So one of the interesting things, you've written a book called COVID-19, The Great Reset. And one of the things that really struck me in March of 2020 was I was driving home. It was a day where everything was shut down in Canada. And all of a sudden, it's like I knew that through technology, we were all connected, all 7 billion plus of us in the world. I don't think I realized how closely we were connected in the physical world. And within a 30-day period, like the world shut down. And it showed or displayed to me, and it talked to me about why I was feeling so uneasy about COVID, about the pandemic. It was this realization that we are so closely tied. And I don't think we understand that, the impact of our own actions sometimes.
Absolutely. We move, we encounter people, we make decisions without realizing where we are, and without realizing the critical importance of interactivity and interconnectedness. Most of our ideas propel GDP growth. The foundation of GDP, of economic growth, you have ideas. That's it, nothing else. And ideas to flourish need this interconnectivity, this ability we have to connect with others, with our fellow human beings. And what the pandemic made us realize is this absolute necessity to be able to interact with our fellow human beings. Of course, we took it naturally because we're never exposed, contrary to the previous generations, to a pandemic in our lifetime. It's something which is quintessentially new. And, like a fish who doesn't realize what water is until it lacks water.
Right.
Well, we didn't realize the fundamental importance of connectivity until we were forced to give it up for a few weeks, for a few months, depending on the situation. And I think this is the major insight that we will derive. There'll be many, of course, but one of the major insights to be derived from the pandemic, this quintessential need we feel for talking to our fellow human beings and to exchanging ideas and to connecting and to discuss anything that comes to our mind. And it's incredibly hard to be creative when you are lonely.
Yeah, yes, that's a great point. And it's funny, I did not write a book on it, but I created very early on something called Macro Trends and the Future Abnormal. And one of the things that I said from the beginning, everybody, obviously, we're on Zoom this morning, and I think technology is wonderful, but I was never a believer that we're going to be completely technology driven. We had our first safely distanced roundtable with a client about 2 weeks ago now, and the energy in the room was just incredible. And I think that there's, as human beings, we crave connectivity, as you say. We crave being with one another. And I'm interested in your thoughts on where you think we're going. Is it going to be a hybrid world? Are we really going to be, a Zoom platform or Teams platform world?
Well, I'm almost convinced after 18 months of living with COVID, the pandemic, that the future of work is hybrid. There is a great deal of evidence that it's going to be the case, and technology has been a very fundamental enabler in terms of allowing the economies and societies to function properly. Unless we were able to order food on the all sort of digital platforms, to have the food delivered to us, to have your telemedicine meeting with your doctor, etc. There has been a tremendous acceleration in the way in which technology allows us to do things more easily and sometimes better. However, we also understand what the limitations of technology are in terms of favoring interconnectivity. Today, I'm delighted to talk to you on Zoom, and it's great. It's much better than not talking to you at all. Right. However, I'd much rather be with you in Canada, and being with you in the same room. We would chit-chat before the interview, we would have a conversation, we would exchange ideas, and so on and so forth. So technology has been a very critical enabler, and it's been pushed forward in a way that would have been unimaginable just a few years ago. Depending on which particular segment of the industry you talk about, it's things that would have taken 20, 30 years a year ago now exist. Drone delivery would have been inconceivable. Flying taxis, they exist already in Dubai. Telemedicine, all sorts of regulatory hurdles. People in my own country, in France, doctors used to say, "Oh, it's going to be, it's going to be live in 2050 because." For all sorts of regulatory reasons, it's inconceivable to have it today. Well, it's happening. It's done, and we'll never do without it any longer. So great enabler, but of course, we are social animals, as you just said. We need to relate to each other. Hence, my firm conviction that even the world of tomorrow will be hybrid. The value of interacting with each other in a proper fashion, in person, and having a quality interaction will increase because of its scarcity. And that's my bet with Summit of Minds, doing more of this, because even though I can take part in so many conferences online, I know that the outcome is always going to be poorer when you interact in a virtual fashion than when you are in the room with a person, feeling the person, feeling that the person has to tell you, and being more open, being more creative, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, no, great point, Thierry. And one of the things you mentioned was how the pandemic accelerated technology and moves us more quickly to a hybrid world. The other thing that I think the pandemic accelerated, and unfortunately I don't see it as a positive by any means, is the notion of plutocracy. The distance between the haves and the have-nots in society. And I say this because, we've seen for decades now an incredible accumulation of wealth by, a small percentage at the top of society. And I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a capitalist, I have no problem with that notion. But what I'm worried about is that plutocracy is becoming systemic. And in Canada now and in the US, it's not just apartment rentals you see. I see a lot of large companies buying up houses, thousands and thousands of houses, and renting them to individuals who can no longer afford the down payment. And traditionally, housing has been one of the great ways that we save. It's the largest investment for many or most people. And now it's almost like the pandemic is in some ways driving us back to the feudal system.
I totally concur with everything you said. And like you, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm an investor, I'm a capitalist at heart. But in the book, COVID-19, The Great Reset, Klaus Schwab and I make the case strongly that the neoliberal economy, as we know it, is dead. It's led to so many excesses, which now need to be addressed, and the rising inequalities was one of them. And the truth is that what gives rise to inequalities is a policy choice. Not all countries in the world are victims of rising inequality. It's a global phenomenon, but it can be tamed in a way. And some countries are doing much better than others at doing that. Of course, there are innumerable ways of measuring inequality. The best known is the Gini coefficient, but you can talk about the inequality of income, of opportunity, of influence, and so on and so forth. And it is true that in the most neoliberal economies, inequalities has reached levels that are socially unacceptable. I think policymakers have now a conviction, and this is being expressed by President Biden, by the way, that it's reached such an extent that it's now threatening the very basis upon which our society, the society is built. So it needs to be addressed. It's incredibly difficult to do so because it involves policies that are going to be difficult to implement, and that goes against so many vested interests. We see it with tech in the US. It's very, very hard to address. And as you said at the beginning of the question, what is very clear is that the pandemic has exacerbated this trend that was pre-existing the eruption of COVID-19. The pandemic was there, but with COVID, we saw it in a very vivid manner. The most disadvantaged segments of society was almost exposed to the pandemic. This is where you had the highest incidents in terms of cases, the highest rate of death. God knows what's going to happen in the coming years, but in the book, we contend that unless policymakers address the issue in a very determined fashion, we'll be facing a very, very bleak future, because we cannot sustain the current path in terms of inequalities. It's become socially unacceptable.
Well, and I think that's a great point when you say socially unacceptable. I have 3 children. They're all in their 20s, early to mid 20s. And I have to say that when I look forward and I think about whether, the world is going to be a good or better place or not as good, I just see the next generation as, I think they're just such incredibly bright thinkers. I think they're, millennials get knocked so often, but they've grown up in a world of interconnectivity where I think they understand at such a young age about inequality, unjust issues or treatment of peoples and whatnot. And I think the conversation is so heightened today. And I think the policymakers just need to recognize that, yes, the next generation that's up and coming is so attuned to a better world or making it a better place.
I couldn't agree more with you. And in fact, it's an issue that I've been looking at in a great deal of depth over the past months, because we do, the Monthly Barometer does for some of its subscribers in-depth tailor-made research. And we've been doing for large companies, particularly large global food companies, a study on how rising youth activism is going to change fundamentally the way in which we behave, we buy, we invest, we live. And of course, if you are the CEO of a very large, prominent company, you are bound to be more than 50 years old or 60-ish. And unless you pay attention to the young voices, and unless you realize the extent to which this wave, this tsunami of activism is going to engulf the world, you are prone to make many big mistakes. Because as you said, the young generation is extremely aware of the risks that we face, is fed up with inequality, not only income inequality, but inequality in terms of gender, for example, inequality in terms of racial inequality, and so on and so forth. It's also incredibly anxious about what's happening with global warming and climate change, and they're going to change the way things are being done. And you can, for example, in the field of food and beverages, you can see that things are changing incredibly fast. The rise of veganism, for example, it's a phenomenon that was underappreciated until a few years ago by most global food companies. It's happening all over the world. Defiance vis-a-vis meat consumption, for example. So things are changing very fast, and the large companies that would be caught unaware of the criticality of these changes are bound to be in trouble.
And it's incredible to me that anybody can be caught unaware. I mean, to me, there's just this tone deafness, I guess you can say. And I don't know if it's my generation that, we were brought up in a very different way. And I'm not knocking it. I'm just, we did not, when I graduated, either first or second degree, we did not have large foundations internationally to go to work for. I mean, they existed, but today they're the norm. One of my daughters is going to study political psychology. And, there's just so many different areas and ways of thinking today that, frankly, we weren't exposed to. And I think that has created what I'll say is, again, the tone deafness to change. The pandemic was not a surprise to Bill Gates. The pandemic wasn't a surprise to many people, but it seemed to catch 90% of us off guard. How do we, and I don't think we're going to solve it in the next 10 minutes, but how do we take away a tone deafness for things that we know are coming, whether it was a pandemic, whether it's climate change and climate change deniers. I don't understand when you see what's happening in front of you, how you can still be fighting so hard every day to make people say, no, that's a real picture.
Absolutely. And I mean, you make a point that I recall very vividly, because in the early 2000s, I was in charge of Davos, the program at Davos. It was this big jamboree that takes place every year in the Swiss mountains. And I did that for 4 years, I think. And every year at Davos, we had a big session on the coming pandemic, of which Bill Gates was part, of course, under WHO and prominent doctors, epidemiologists, scientists, etc. Similarly, we had in this year, so about 20 years ago, many sessions about the impending risk of climate change, and it struck me that when you're an important decision maker, it's very hard to envision radical change, and you want to do everything possible to prevent a cognitive overload. You have so many issues to deal with, most of them being operational issues, which
Right.
are immensely complex in nature and difficult to deal with, but linked with with the running operations of your company, your business. So when someone comes and talks to you about pandemic or climate change or any macro issue that is exogenous to the core activity of your business, you don't pay attention. And I think it has to do with our human nature. We don't want to be, first of all, we don't want to pay attention to big, overwhelming macro risks that might affect our sense of well-being. And it's true that thinking about this is anxious provoking. So we say, okay, we are going to brush it aside because I don't want to think today about the pandemic of tomorrow. This is what everybody did when Bill Gates and others were warning about the risk of a pandemic. And you have a similar phenomenon regarding climate change, regarding wars, regarding geopolitical conflicts, just because changing is painful. When you change, it's a very painful process. Changing from a psychological point of view entails a loss. And when you're the CEO of a company that employs God knows how many thousands of people, making a decision to change requires a lot of courage and a lot of foresight. And I don't think it's accessible to everybody.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think that one of the things that many people lose is I'll call it the change muscle. I think that when we're kids, we're able to do a lot of things, change direction, think more openly. And one of the things that I've been saying when I talk about, again, macro trends in the future or the next abnormal is the notion of scenario planning. I think that corporations, whether it's middle or top management, are so stuck to SWOT analysis. And I sometimes feel when I'm working with organizations and top leadership that they feel they get, points for every bullet that they put down as a strength, weakness, opportunity, or threat. And I've been challenging them to write down 3 in each and then work through the scenarios, work through the implications. But because I just don't, I think that's a muscle that we truly lose. Again, to your point where we're focused on operations and not on strategy, not on vision, not on foresight. So how do we bring that back to the organization looking forward?
Well, it's a question that I can answer with a certain degree of confidence because, first of all, I wrote a book back in 2006 called Global Risk, Business Success in Turbulent Times. And it was based upon, there was a theoretical chapter, but it was also based on interviews I conducted with CEOs of the World Economic Forum, so big names, people who are heading large global companies, and I'm continuing. When I left the forum, I've stayed in touch with the CEOs and others, and I've always been trying ever since to get a sense of what is it that differentiates people who are successful from those who are not successful or less successful, and what strikes me is that the CEOs who do best, or the investors who do best, are those who are capable of getting the big picture. This is what the former dean, or no, current dean of the Harvard Business School, Nitin Noya, called contextual intelligence. If you want to run a global company, you need to get a sense of what the big picture is and where your company fits into it. Otherwise, you are bound to fail and to be in trouble because you won't pay attention to geopolitical risk, you won't pay attention to societal risk, you won't pay attention to climate change. Well, not anymore. Now it's all over the place, but that was how it was perceived 10 years ago. So being prepared, I think, is what makes a critical difference. And you can only do so if you are capable of listening to dissenting voices. And there is also a tremendous amount of literature in the of business literature on how successful investors and business leaders succeed by demonstrating the capability to listen to contrarian voices. This is what Warren Buffett said. Every time he forms a conviction about investing in a particular stock, he will only listen to people who tell him that this is a stupid idea. And then if he keeps believing it's an own idea, he knows it sounds